Coming up on Market to Market, Americans welcome the new year with a decidedly upbeat economic outlook. California growers ponder the fallout of President Obama's move to spare millions from deportation. And a synergetic effort unites farmers and fishermen in the quest for a better catch. Those stories and market analysis with Tomm Pfitzenmaier next.
Funding for Market to Market is provided by Grinnell Mutual. You think differently about a customer when you stand in the middle of his dreams. We work to make sure you get covered right. Grinnell Mutual, a policy of working together. Information on finding an agent near you is available at grinnellmutual.com. This is the Friday, January 2 edition of Market to Market, the weekly journal of rural America.
Hello, I'm Mike Pearson. Americans rang in the new year this week with the brightest economic outlook in years. The National Association for Business Economics predicts the U.S. economy will expand by more than 3% in 2015. If realized, that would be the strongest growth in more than a decade. The Energy Department estimates U.S. families will save $550 on gasoline this year. And with the number of jobs created in 2014 expected to hit a 15-year high, the Commerce Department says consumer debt has fallen to levels last seen in 2002. In rural America, however, lower commodity prices, depreciating land values, and declining net farm income are expected to limit economic expansion. A crucial factor in that equation is agricultural productivity. That's especially true for fruit and vegetable producers who rely heavily on immigrant labor. But with the winter harvest looming on the horizon, seasonal workers are in short supply. Thousands of farm workers in California, the nation's leading producer of fruits, vegetables, and nuts, stand to benefit under President Obama's recent executive action on immigration, sparing 5 million undocumented immigrants from deportation. While details of the policy shift are yet to be worked out, some agricultural trade associations are warning against ramifications the president's move may have on the Golden State's farmers. California-based Western growers, citing a decade-long decline in the state's agricultural workforce, claimed Obama's solution could exacerbate such losses by dismantling the mechanism which lures new employees. In the past, producers in the state's Central Valley have relied heavily on undocumented immigrant workers, especially during harvest.
Our demands for labor out here are seasonal. There are huge demands in July, August, September. There's not enough people here to fill those demands. So we really need to have a guest worker program to allow people in legally, pick the crops, go back home. It's truly my belief that if we'd had this 30 or 40 years ago, we would not have the immigration problem that we have today.
Western Growers estimates a current 15 to 20% national shortage for farm laborers, many of whom toil by hand for low wages. For years, this worker deficit has driven industry calls for congressional action on immigration reform.
I have one answer. Pass a bill.
In lieu of legislation, the president's plan will protect the parents of legal U.S. residents from deportation and expand a 2012 program that shields people brought into the U.S. illegally as children from being sent back to their home countries. California's migrant labor force could choose to leave the uncertainty of seasonal jobs for steady, year-round work, building homes, cooking in restaurants, and cleaning hotel rooms. And some agricultural advocates warn there will be no one left to fill the void on the farm.
U.S. workers will not work in this type of work. They refuse to work in it. The only way they're ever going to work in it, and God forbid that we go to a real depression of 1929, then maybe that's when people will realize that there is no more welfare.
Other industry groups in the state, like the United Farm Workers, put a positive spin on Obama's action. With proper documentation, the group says, laborers will feel empowered and be more valuable. And rather than live in fear of deportation, workers would be able to challenge employer abuses on minimum wage and overtime or leave their job altogether. Such newfound mobility could create competition for farm workers that would potentially increase wages. Others still forecast few changes for California's $46.4 billion agricultural industry. WKF Giving Fund, an immigrant advocacy group, says a significant number of migrant workers often lack the language, education, and technical skills to move up the employment ladder. While that group concedes that under the president's action, some farm workers surely will be able to move on to better job opportunities, it says it's not going to be a mass exodus. Last year, the Environmental Protection Agency proposed new guidelines expanding its control of America's waterways. The Waters of the U.S. proposal would broaden federal authority over this precious resource on farms and ranches, including some tributaries and streams that are dry for much of the year. EPA's proposal received more than 1 million public comments, and its critics characterized the plan as regulatory overreach. Online rhetoric notwithstanding, a synergetic effort in the Corn Belt, of all places, is uniting farmers and fishermen in the quest for a better catch. David Miller explains.
When the critically acclaimed film A River Runs Through It was released in 1992, it drew thousands of tourists to Montana and helped rejuvenate local economies and waterways. It also introduced a whole new generation to the art of fly fishing. But the beauty and skill showcased so vividly in the movie isn't limited to Western states. And if you look hard enough, it can even be found in the heart of the Corn Belt.
Oh, there's another one. Oh, woo. Another brownie. It makes me feel like I'm in the mountains and I'm a long ways from work and everything else. And this is one of the prettiest places I fish. And I get here as often as I can.
For Kleckner, who is president of the Driftless chapter of Trout Unlimited, as well as a fishing guide and owner of the Decorah, Iowa-based Bear Creek Anglers, this is more than just another day wading in cold water. He knows each trout he catches and releases is there because a large number of people have been working together for more than 80 years. The trout come from two sources: the native populations that swim in North Bear Creek, and others stocked by the Iowa Department of Natural Resources from the nearby Decorah Fish Hatchery. But preserving and expanding populations of brown, brook, and rainbow trout in northeastern Iowa is much more involved than simply restocking local streams. Trout thrive in fast-moving 50-degree water and need a gravel-covered stream bed to survive. The spring-fed creeks in northeastern Iowa are the perfect habitat for these fish. Rainbow and brook trout are native to the region, and brown trout were introduced in the 1880s. But as farming and industrialization grew, trout numbers began to decline, and in the 1930s, efforts to help bring back dwindling populations were started. Efforts have really kicked into high gear during the past 2 decades as a strong relationship between farmers, the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, and the Federal Natural Resources Conservation Service has been forged. Prior to his retiring from the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, Bill Kalishek worked with farmers in the region to help restore trout streams for more than 25 years.
My experience with farmers has been that most farmers want to do the right thing. They want to do what is correct for the resource and correct for the stream that flows through their property. Now, sometimes they aren't able to do the right thing because of economic or social issues that come into play. And then there is that small percentage that doesn't care about doing the right thing. And unfortunately, when you're talking about trout streams that have very small watersheds, just 1 or 2 really bad fields of high erosion can have a big impact on that small stream. As you find a cooperating landowner, or as you decide that there's a piece of state property, a section of stream on state property that needs to have some rehabilitation work, you start to do that work, and as other landowners see that, they start to realize that's a good project. I want to see that happen on my property too.
Since the early 1990s, projects have included seeding riparian areas next to the stream to filter water and hold back the soil, placing riprap along the stream banks to reduce erosion, adding bank hides to give trout a place to escape from predators, and the installation of fences to keep cattle out of the water. Private contractors do much of the construction, but there are some projects that only happen because of volunteer labor and donated materials. According to the Iowa DNR, anglers make more than 500,000 trips to Hawkeye State trout streams and inject more than $14 million into Iowa's economy every year. Efforts by landowners, volunteers, and government agencies have helped clean up the water and keep gravel stream beds clear of silt, allowing trout to lay their eggs. Those efforts have helped re-establish naturally reproducing trout in more than 40 of Iowa's 105 trout streams. An example of where the cooperation between farmers and government yielded results can be seen at Valley View Farm, where Walter Langland and his son Steve run a diversified grain and livestock operation in rural Winneshiek County. In 1993, the elder Langlands started the first of several restoration projects by fencing off the riparian section along North Bear Creek to keep the cattle out of the stream.
It makes me feel good that someone else can enjoy fishing along a stream that has good access to it.
Some of Langland's other projects include stream bank restoration, bank hides, and the creation of a parking lot for anglers.
Well, this is the Century Farm. I don't know who is going to carry on it after my wife and I and son are gone, but we need to care for the land for future generations.
Not far away, Jason Howe runs Howland Hills Farm in rural Alameda County. Howe sought help from the DNR more than a decade ago to restore the land along his section of Patterson Creek near Waukon.
I was kind of tired of seeing all that good topsoil washed away, and so I had went to them and asked about it, and I think around the same time is when I was wanting to get the trout, see if I could get the trout to start reproducing, wondering what that would take, and spoke with the DNR about that, and most years I'll do one or two of the worst banks, I guess, to kind of keep them from eroding away, and it's been working out pretty good.
Howe spent his summer days on the creek when he was young, and his children are continuing the tradition of fishing, swimming, and playing in the water. For Kleckner, just catching the trout tells him things are improving as more soil remains in nearby farm fields and out of the stream.
Having a pretty stream with nice rocky banks and all that sort of thing is important, and that's nice. However, if the farmers don't take care of the 500 or 1,000 acres that they're farming that's in the watershed, pretty stream banks aren't going to help natural reproduction of brown trout. So, I mean, it's all the farmers taking care of the watershed that has allowed us to have natural brown trout reproduction going on here, and for me, that's pretty exciting.
The ideal of farmers and environmentalists sharing common goals of protecting and enhancing natural resources on which both depend often seems to be elusive these days. But the synergy is evident in northeastern Iowa and could easily have served as the inspiration for Pulitzer Prize-winning author Norman Maclean, who once wrote, "Eventually, all things merge into one, and a river runs through it." For Market to Market, I'm David Miller.
Next, the Market to Market Report.
We're producing this edition of Market to Market on Wednesday to give the people who bring you the show each week a chance to gather with family and friends to ring in the new year. For the abbreviated trading week, March wheat lost 21 cents, while the nearby corn contract moved nearly 18 cents lower. Soybeans gave up 30 cents, while the nearby meal contract followed suit, falling $14.20 per ton. In the softs, cotton fell back as the March contract lost $1.36 per hundredweight. Over in the dairy parlor, January Class 3 milk rose 16 cents, while the deferred contract climbed by 37 cents. Livestock prices were mixed this week as the February cattle contract gained $1.08. Nearby feeders were up more than $5.40, and the February lean hog contract gave up 35 cents. In the currency market, the euro lost a little less than a basis point against the dollar. Crude oil hovered around its lowest price in 5 years and settled Wednesday with a loss of $1.46. COMEX gold declined by $11.20 per ounce, and the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index lost nearly 10 points to settle at 419.25. Here now to lend us his insight on these and other trends is one of our regular market analysts, Tomm Pfitzenmaier. Tom, welcome back.
Thanks, Mike.
Last week, or the past few weeks, we've been talking about this run-up in wheat prices as part of kind of a risk premium put on by all the events in Russia. And now we've since given a lot of that back. Is the risk coming out of that market?
Absolutely it is. I think everybody's sort of figured out, well, you know, the Russians are going to actually export a fair amount of wheat before all that kicks in. The amount that they have left isn't all that great. World supplies of grains in general are high. Yeah, I think that all got factored in well enough, and you've seen it, like you said, drop pretty sharply off the highs.
Does that falling trend look like it's going to continue? Are we back in sort of a realistic mode with all this global wheat, more headwinds ahead?
I think we are. I think you're probably going to see it in the corn and the wheat. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's not to say you can't have little rallies, but I think you'd want to use those as selling opportunities now. Back up in the, I don't know, 615 to 625 range on the basis of front month.
Make some sales,
right,
and protect yourself a little bit. Now, and you mentioned the corn facing some headwinds. We saw it this week drop about 17 cents. And that's in light of, we've had a lot of news on the demand side. Ethanol grind has been tremendous. Exports have been good. What's with this trailing off in corn prices recently?
Well, you know, corn rallied for 3 months in a row. And this holiday week, you got the end of the year. I guess it's not a big surprise to see people take some profits, hit the sidelines ahead of the new year. I guess we'll have to see Friday, Monday, Tuesday if the buying starts to show up. I guess it's my opinion that I don't think anybody's going to. Technically, it did break down, so that part doesn't look that great. But I don't think anybody's going to want to press the short side too hard ahead of that January 12th supply-demand report, since there's so much potential for change in that thing.
Now, you mentioned technically it did break down, falling through that $4.03 level on Wednesday. What's the next downward level producers should keep an eye on?
I think you have to look at I think it's a 50-day moving average, comes across at about 391 and 3/4. There's also some other support areas, kind of 92, 93. So down in there, I'd guess you'd start to see some pretty good buying. If it's going to show up, that's probably be where it would be at.
Now, as we look to this USDA report, there's a history of USDA reports changing numbers in January, seeing some revisions. Are you anticipating any big revisions come the 12th?
I'm anticipating some revisions. I guess I'm not. You know, the people that have been buying corn for the last 3 months are anticipating some fairly good changes. And a lot of that's generated by this disparity between the FSA planted acreage and USDA's number on acres. The differential this year is about 4.6 million acres, which is about 1.5 million more than higher than it's ever been. So, you know, there's some explanations for that. The FSA was busy because they had livestock work to do this year. There's some of the big farmers didn't participate because of gross adjusted income sort of parameters that limited their participation. The program was left open till the end of December, so all the reporting hasn't been done yet. So there's a lot of, you know, stuff up in the air about how that's going to be reconciled. Now, since it's open till the end of December, you wonder if the USDA is even going to use those numbers in this report. They obviously have their own methodology for developing acreage. I think it's probably going to be pulled back some, but I'm not sure it's going to be to the great. I mean, some people think it's going to be 2 million acres. If you take that times 175, that's 350 million bushel. Well, that's a pretty significant drop. I don't think it's going to be that dramatic.
Okay.
Yield adjustments, Some are looking for a big adjustment there. Historically, it moves maybe half a bushel per acre, not that much. On the demand side, yes, exports, they're okay. I don't know if they're good enough to justify a change or not in this report. Same with ethanol, probably not much change. Then it becomes the wild card of feed usage. There's a lot of talk that maybe feed usage in the fourth quarter, was higher than we thought, and there could be some upward adjustments. So, I mean, you can paint a scenario of the corn carryout dropping all the way to 1.5 and 1.6, which would be quite supportive, or you can paint a scenario where it basically didn't change, and you got the whole trade leaning pretty heavily to the bull side. So, you know, it's going to have to even be more bullish than that to sustain an upward move. So, and then you get in the mix of all that, farmer selling, there hasn't been that much of that. Is that going to change after the first of the year, or are they going to wait till after the 12th and then make marketing decisions? So there's a lot of sort of balls up in the air in terms of trying to figure out what corn could do. I guess I think you still have to use that rally like we saw up in, like you said, 417, 435 or so on new crop, and maybe start easing out of some corn at least.
Go ahead and make some sales up in that neck of the woods. Now, as we jump down to soybeans, this was a pretty big break for the week on beans as well. What do you see about the bean market as we head into this new year?
But again, beans are in a trading range. They're probably well supported at $10 or so, 10.10 on the January contract. We didn't even get that low on Wednesday. You got up in that 10.50, 10.55 range. That's probably an area that should be sold. I mean, you look at the bean, we're probably still going to have a big bean carryout. Maybe it's 350, maybe it's 400. South America's crops developing quite well. A lot of people are starting to talk about a Brazilian crop that could be as big as 98 to 100 million metric ton. We're probably going to have a substantial, maybe not an increase in acres, but substantial planted acres next year up here. If with good subsoil, which most people are reporting, we could have 650 million bushel carryout at this time next year. That certainly doesn't support 1050 beans. That baseline report the USDA put out, they predicted an 850 plus. And whatever you say else you say about their accuracy in their report, they tend to be somewhat right on their price projections. So again, I think beans up at these levels, you need to be unloading some of them because there's not a lot of good prospects for them to go up from here and help you out by holding them.
All right. Now let's jump down into the livestock markets. Cattle up again this week. We saw some strength in the cash markets. Does that look like that's going to continue?
You know, we broke the daylights out of cattle there. They've rallied back nicely. You're heading into the first of the year. People are getting a little poultry and hammed out. You've got a little more money rattling around in their pockets because of cheaper gas. So I would guess that's going to tend to be supportive. We've really been quite lucky in terms of weather for cattle producers. Generally, you have something crop up there in January and February that tends to be price supportive to the fat cattle. So we might have a little pullback. We did have a little pullback in this shortened week, but I think it'll be well supported, and I don't see a lot of downside potential here in the next couple months anyway. And you know, you got a situation where people are starting to hold back a few heifers, and that's going to tend to be supportive in terms of numbers. You still have fairly heavy cattle sitting out there but that got cleaned up a little bit. That's one of the things that was accomplished that big break, I think. There's some of those guys holding big cattle went, holy schmoly, I need to get rid of some of these. So some of that happened too.
Kind of got that cleaned up.
Which is a good thing.
Yeah, and now as we look down at the feeder cattle market, that was where that really big break happened, a $35 break 2 weeks ago. Bounced back a little bit. Strength probably going to continue into the new year on tight numbers?
Well, you put $1 on corn, which that's a big negative for feeders. And then you drop the fat price $10, that's another one. So if the fat price stabilizes, you start to see corn maybe pull back a little bit into the first quarter of 2015. I think that's going to tend to be price supportive to the feeder market. And I'm not sure the cash market actually ever broke as much as the futures did anyway. So I think you'll get that basis sort of straightened back out again as you go into the winter months here.
All right, now we do have a question from one of our viewers on Facebook. Mike in Ames, Iowa is curious, as you gaze into your crystal ball, look to the future, third and fourth quarter 2015 hog prices. Do you anticipate there to be an uptick to provide profit opportunities later in this upcoming year?
Absolutely not. I think you're seeing expansion. I think they've seen good profits. They're looking at relatively cheap corn. And I think you're going to continue to see expansion in the pork industry that's going to, and in addition to that, you're seeing that finally the poultry industry is starting to really kick in. So you're going to have that competition that's going to ramp up. So unless this cold weather, there's still a little question mark about PED going through the winter. You know, we've had fairly somewhat of an increase in sow numbers, but are those sows going to produce? You know, if that PD virus is sort of under control and they produce well, then I really don't think you have a lot of upside potential. And I know those prices are discounted fairly heavily already out in those months, but they're discounted for a reason, I believe.
Is it worth selling at those discounted prices for the fourth and fifth quarters?
Well, I think on any rallies, if you think you can lock something decent in, if you can't, then maybe buy yourself a put. But going out that far, those things are really expensive. So I'd probably not.
Okay, go ahead and save your money and see how this comes out. Well, Tom, thank you for taking the time to join us here as we begin 2015.
There you go.
Really appreciate it. That wraps up this edition of Market to Market. But Tom and I will continue our discussion and answer some of your questions, which you submitted to us via Twitter and Facebook on our Market Plus segment online. You can also find audio podcasts and streaming video of our program exclusively at the Market to Market website. And be sure to join us next week when we'll get the call on the art of auctioneering. So until next time, thanks for watching and Happy New Year, everybody.
Of Iowa Public Television, which is solely responsible for its content. Funding for Market to Market is provided by Grinnell Mutual. You think differently about a customer when you stand in the middle of his dreams. We work to make sure you get covered right. Grinnell Mutual, a policy of working together. Information on finding an agent near you is available at grinnellmutual.com.